And so as time has gone on, people have observed, hey, you do family totally different. That's because they're always at my priority. I'll cancel events. I'll say no to important people. I've gotten better at it too. And I didn't have an example along the way that would show me. So to give you guys a little bit of my background, and I'm gonna stay intentional and talk quick. So if I'm talking too fast, slow me down. My dad was a violent criminal, and he was violent at home because he was our martial arts instructor. And we were always learning to fight. That meant that whenever we were getting disciplined, it was a fight, but you don't get to hit back, right? My dad was bigger than me, stronger than me, faster than me. At this point in my life, I'm still not as big and strong as my dad was, and he had mitts. They were 3x, dude. He could hit hard, bro. My old man used to do things we would do, and we tried to do this as adults, and it's not worked well. But my dad would hang five 2-liter bottles of whatever in the garage, fill them up with water, and you swing them all at him. He'd break every single one. One punch or one kick, every single one would snap. We tried that with some young adults in my last youth group, and so that guy broke his hand, so we've not done it since, right? It's not easy. I have yet to break a bottle, right? Uh, but I grew up with a very violent dad and a mom who was abused. My dad would beat my mom. I've seen my dad drag my mom out of the house by her hair. The day my brother was going to shoot my dad and kill him, I stood on the side of the house with my dad, and my brother had a long rifle and he pointed at my dad. And I stood there next to my brother and I said, today's the day dad dies, right? My brother was going to shoot my dad and my dad didn't care, just like my brother didn't care. My mom stood up and she left with my dad because she knew my brother, she thought in that moment was going to go to jail for the rest of his life. So when you say, wow, David's connected, and you hear the story about him being connected to family and being connected to like his kids, you have to hear it from a person who I didn't come from a good old dad, right? My dad was violent, shattered, abusive. And that's the reason that I say when I had kids, the gravity from my wife grew. But I also realized like you have to take enough invoicing of your own self, enough intake to start going, hey, the data is not adding up. And you start asking yourself, and candidly, depending on where you're at in life, you're not gonna be able to answer that question. All you know is that the mainframe is broken. Do you guys understand what I'm talking about? Does that resonate with anybody? You're just like, man, I feel like I'm self-sabotaging. Things are going well, and I feel like I have everything I'm supposed to want. I'm trying to be on my best behavior, and somehow or another, I screwed up again. Huh. Welcome to the club. The only thing is, it's a short-lived club. You'll either end up alone or you'll fix it. That's your only option, right? And the reason I start with this tiny little circle is because this tiny little circle is the center of your universe. For everybody here, the center of your universe is you. At some point in time, you've probably had an existential conversation with yourself to ask, are the people around me even real? We all had that conversation when we were kids. You're like, if I die, does the earth end? You know what I'm saying? Like, does life go on? And then somewhere along the way, as you mature, you start to have these wild thoughts that you're like, oh my God, God is so complex that the complexity of my life is literally happening in the person next door, and I don't even know them. They're wondering if I'm real. They're wondering if the world stops, if we're all trapped in the matrix. You're just like, the complexity is outrageous that God could put a universe inside your brain and every person in here, and that the worlds interact and collide, right? If the center of your universe is broken and it has a poor foundation, everything traveling out from there will have poor results, right? And so when it comes to relationship, on the way over here, I was praying. I was just spending time with the Holy Spirit, worshiping, and absolutely the Holy Spirit interrupted my process and plans in which I plan to start and to teach you guys about business relationships, which I hope to be able to get to after this. And he talked to me about the center of your universe, which is, how is your mainframe today? Did your mainframe like mine? Did you start off with a mainframe like mine? Whoever wrote the program of your life, did they write it like mine? I had to hear terrible stories. I saw awful things. The stories I heard, they were just terrible. My dad was a terrible human being. And candidly, if I had to be honest with you, most of what happened as a child is blacked out. And I have no intent on reopening that. And I've had that conversation many times with people when they're like, let's talk about your childhood. And I'm like, hey, you know what? I feel like I'm doing okay. And reopening it, I don't believe, and it's not always necessary. I want to be important. I want to put this out there because I've had many conversations with people that are operating in marriage and family therapy. It's not always necessary for you to rip the Band-Aid off to take a deep look. That's not always necessary. What is necessary is being fully vulnerable before your creator, God, and that created this heaven and the earth, and say, yeah, I think there might be some wrong that I've been keeping from you and from me, right? There might be some really hurt places in there that I've not let you touch yet. It's not about you reliving. It's not necessarily about you going backwards and saying these things were terrible, right? It's about being available to say, am I keeping this from you, God? Am I not? Is this something I'm holding so tight because it wounded me that I don't even want God to touch it? Because I don't even want to look at it to be able to go back to go, hey, that thing really hurt. Because the first thing you have to do is go back and say, that really hurt. Now I want to be clear because I know that there are many different stories in the room. We talked about that. Everybody's on a different journey, right? So maybe your story isn't like mine, where you had this terribly abusive father and this mother who was beaten and abused. And we were, I mean, guys, we were going to jail forever. At the age of 15, I was charged with the largest felony offense ever charged to a minor in the history of San Bernardino County, charged with life without parole. And then we got busted while we were going to court for breaking and entering. We were in a house, helicopter and everything. Like, we were going to jail forever. God's grace was on us. But maybe that's not your story. Maybe your story is just brokenhearted. Maybe your story is just wounded. Maybe your story is you had great parents and you're trying to figure out why your head's not working. I don't know what it is, right? For everybody, you know your story because you're thinking of your story right now because you're the center of your universe. So right now you're thinking of your story, not mine. You heard my story and you connected it to your story, right? But you guys are trying to figure out, how does this apply to my story? It applies to your story because we're talking about the mainframe. Everybody knows, maybe you guys, this has happened to you, but I had my iPhone fail. Well, while I was in Italy on a trip with my mom, of all people, my iPhone bricked. Has anybody had an iPhone brick on them? It's the absolute worst thing. Your iPhone turns into an Apple logo and there is no recovery. It will not come back, period. It's called an iPhone brick. And it happened on, like, I don't know, 15.1 or something like that. They changed it 3 days later. They found out it happened, changed it 3 days later. Well, my phone was just lucky enough to update on that 15.1 and then fly to Europe. They told me the reason your phone won't work and we have to completely reset your phone is there's a firmware problem. So inside of the firmware that it uploaded, in the software upload, there's a kernel in there that cannot be fixed. You have to start over. If you say, because every time you update your phone, it puts a layer on the old one, puts a layer on the old one. So they're like, you cannot recover the phone. If you recover the phone, it will put that old software on any phone you put it on. You have to start over. Now, I found a way to cheat the system. I got my phone back, but it was literally a series of events of transferring between phones to recover all my images and things like that. But the point is that it works no different for you. You guys are a series of information that's been processed into your brain, either taught or seen or learned or observed or whatever, right? Whether you were in the environment or whether your personality decided to mold that way, you have a framework, and we call that your personality. Each one of you guys have your personality. Your personality is your character traits. It's the things that life has led you to be exactly who you are today. Sometimes you guys feel like I'm self-sabotaging. Now, I can really nerd out right now and tell you guys how these self-sabotaging things work, and I will get to that in just 1 second, right? And then most often you will self-sabotage your life, your own personal life, when you guys are under great duress or stressful environments. And I'm going to explain that in a second, right? But the thing is like, you have to take inventory in this moment and go, what are the areas of my life that were challenging, that I may be avoiding, that may be sabotaging deep and connected relationship because I'm afraid of being left, right? I'm afraid of being abandoned, right? One of the strongest things that my wife ever said to me in my entire life is, I'm not going to leave. I didn't know I needed to hear that until I heard it, because my old man left. Now, I didn't know until I was probably 40 that that's what that equaled, because my wife was getting her education and that. So she was teaching me, and I was like, oh, that's deep. You know what I'm saying? I just knew it felt good when we were in a moment, and she's like, hey, I'm not going to leave. And I was like, oh, cool. Because I've been hiding things from you because I thought you would leave. So if you're not going to leave, we can work this stuff out. You know what I mean? But I didn't know that I was doing that until I heard it from the other side that said, hey, I'm not going to go anywhere. But I didn't know for 5 or 8 more years from the time she had said that there was something on the inside of me that needed to hear that. And part of that is because I was ignoring the fact that there were things that were said, or there were things that happened in my mainframe. There were pieces, there were question marks all over my programming that definitely left me feeling a certain way. And I perceived the world, my worldview became through my experiences, because it programmed my experiences. Does that make sense, guys? So what we have to do when we're going to talk about relationship, I told the trader, I said, guys, if I show up here and I start talking to you guys about relationship, and I give you every best practice, right? We call those BDPs in business. So I give you every best demonstrated practice, and then you can't execute on them because you feel like you did the 1, 2, and 3s and you're not getting the output. So you're like, Dave, you said if I do one plus, so let's call that 11 plus 12 plus, 15, it'll equal, but I'm getting 42. I hope that's not 42. But you guys get what I'm saying, right? Like, you're like, Dave, I'm getting the wrong answer, right? And part of that is I've always said that if you grow up and you're always told from the time you're a kid that 1 plus 2 equals 4, everything you do from fundamental basic arithmetic will be wrong. Everything. If they teach you everything else right, if your brain is wired wrong here at basic arithmetic, no matter what you do, you'll have a wrong answer and you'll fight about it too. Because if you grew up somewhere out in the boondocks and that's what they taught you and you learned it and it always equaled the same answer because there's a rhythm in math and somebody found that they could change that so that it always worked one number off, it would always work for you, but it'd always be different than everybody else. And you'd be sitting there having conversations and nobody understands you. It's like, I'm so different. I don't understand, but babe, I'm saying, or mom, dad, I'm saying, you're not hearing me. And you're getting frustrated because it's not making sense. Some of that may just be framework, you guys. Some of that may be that we just need to pull some of those plugs out and start addressing it and getting past that place. The first thing you have to do is the thing it took me forever to do, right? Literally, I was not able to process what had happened with my dad until he died. I could not allow myself to go there. For some reason, I felt like if I got honest about who my dad was, then it would change my entire world. And I didn't know how to do that. When he died, I was like, all right, now I can get honest about my old man. I couldn't say that my dad was a terrible person until after he died. I just couldn't say it. I don't know why. I couldn't tell you today why. I haven't gotten to that part of my wife's lesson yet. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know what it was. I just couldn't do it. So once he died, I finally felt free to be honest about it because I did not want to dishonor him. I didn't want to be dishonoring because I loved my old man. And some of you guys know because you have a parent that maybe is not perfect, and somewhere in there there's a desire for them to be who they were called to be or who they're supposed to be, and you feel like if you were to ever speak negatively about them, that might break that hope you carry deeply on the inside that they would be who you're supposed to be, right? And so I just wouldn't go there, right? But with the framework, guys, with the framework, we can't address if there's a problem if we're not really willing to go back to the program. And so it does not have to be as big as mine. Maybe it's a woman. Maybe it's a girl that hurts you. Maybe it's your mom. Maybe your mom was not a beautiful person to you. And your connection to women is that you can't trust them, that they don't understand you because your mom never understood you. She couldn't understand men's problems, right? Like with my boys at home, sometimes I tell my wife, I say, hey, I got it. I got it. I don't need my boys talking to you about grown men stuff. I'll take them in the outside. We'll go have a conversation. I'll pour out grace. I'll pour out love. I constantly point them back to Jesus, have them reconcile the things that are wrong, whatever those things are. There's very seldom do I need them to be uh, vulnerable with their mom in detail. I did that because there was nobody for me. So I did that for my boys because nobody did it for me. Because I was like, I had to figure this whole mess of pornography and secret sins and all this out. And shame had me running away in circles. Like I told you, I was just hiding things from my wife so she wouldn't leave. You know what I mean? Like if I just keep up this facade, like you think I'm great, you'll never leave. And the whole time I just keep throwing stuff in the back of this wagon I'm pulling, and finally it just got too heavy and it breaks. And then all of a sudden you break, you fall apart in front of people. And then you don't even know what's going on. You have these meltdowns of secrets and all of this nonsense, right? What I'm trying to help you guys do is look somewhere in the past that maybe you've been avoiding that because it's sensitive, because you know it could hurt to readdress it, because you know that that's a place you protect because those are the things that make us hardened. Those are the things where we shut off our emotions. I remember one time when I was young, my dad whooped my butt. I was in the shower crying. When I say whoop my butt, I mean, I'm talking about like got beat up by your old man. I was in the shower crying, and I remember it like it was yesterday. And I stopped crying in the shower, and I was like, "Oh, we don't have to cry." I promise you, that's how I went in the shower. I was like, "Oh, I don't have to cry? I always shut the well off." Bro, it was 20 plus years before I cried again. No need. Didn't need to cry again. And then when I got saved and the Holy Spirit came into my heart, then I would cry every Sunday at church. every Sunday at church, but I wasn't crying yet about anything else. I wasn't connected to anything else because I had only opened one gate. I was like, well, God's real. We can cry over there. But if it comes to feeling at home, if it comes to how you're feeling with your spouse or your friends or your family, those gates are still shut. And so it takes time. It took time because I wasn't willing to address it. What I'm trying to help you guys do is hear and learn from my lesson, right? Wisdom is learning from other people's mistakes, not having to make those mistakes and learn from your own. So I'm trying to help you guys speed up the process by giving you some of the information that's made a difference for me. And most of my success in life comes post all of those terrible mistakes, all of the hiding and the keeping, and because there's so much self-sabotaging happening that takes place in that space. I'll explain to you guys why that self-sabotaging happens in 1 second, because it's a really cool thing and you're never going to forget it, because I never forget it when they taught us in New York. I flew out and I went to the neuroscience leadership. Technically, they brought them to us. We had 200 of the best leaders in our country, in our company in the country, fly out to Mohonk, New York, this beautiful resort. And then we flew out this huge company from New York that basically are all neuroscientists, and they talk about leadership and the way the brain works. And they explained something there that made a lot of sense to me that I would never forget, and would also keep me from getting stressed because of what it produced. And what happens, guys, in the brain when you get stressed, let's just call this let's call this the brain. Wait, here's a nose, right? So you're going to get an idea. This is the frontal lobe, okay? This frontal lobe is where all of your creativity comes from. I'm not going to spell creativity here. This is where all your creativity comes from, guys. Your frontal lobe, the frontal part of your brain, is the part that processes your creativity. It's the part that creative thinking happens when you're problem solving and you're fixing things that you couldn't fix before, and all of a sudden it's making sense. This piece works, right, when you're not under great stress, because this part processes about 10% of your thinking power. And it's also one of the fastest to overheat in the head, just like a computer. When you put too much stress on your brain, the frontal lobe overheats and it defaults to the center of your brain. You can look it up wherever it's at. I don't remember. It was a big name, and it's the one part I don't remember the story. But there is a part in the middle of your brain right here. When this overheats, your brain tells it to go back to this part. This part is secondhand nature. The part of your brain right here that's in the center when your frontal lobe overheats is your secondhand nature. You know what secondhand nature is? Your programming. So this is a terrible loop that we get caught in. So now I'm being stressed at work. I'm being stressed in my relationships. I'm feeling tons of pressure. And then I'm starting to see me self-sabotage. You know why? Because I moved out in great pressure. I've moved into secondhand nature, which means that all of my pre-programming is at work now. Secondhand nature is the thing you do when somebody tosses me a ball and then I catch it. And I have to think about it. My brain remembers what to do in this moment and it grabs it. I didn't have to process ball coming, grab ball, hand down. I don't have to do any of that. The same way you don't have to process that I'm going to mess this up, right? Same way. To put this into perspective, the Kyler you guys know today, right, that you know and admire right here, under great duress, when this frontal lobe shuts down, will act like the old Kyler. He won't act like the Kyler you know. Put him under a ton of pressure, squeeze him, and he's going to start feeling temptation to respond the way he used to. He's going to start feeling like the old things that used to draw him and give him pleasure, whether that is lust or desires, or whether that is run away, whether that's don't talk. Maybe some of you guys, your response is, I'm gonna block you out. We're not talking anymore. I'm just gonna leave. Right? Whatever that poor response is that used to be us when we're under great pressure and our brain overheats, too much stress. Right here, fellas. And you wonder to yourself, dang, why is it when great pressure shows up and things get really hard, I just want to go back to the old habits? Paul said, the thing I desire not to do most is the very thing I do. I had to ask myself all the time, why is this? Why does the Bible say we continue to return back to, vomit like a dog, right? Like we go back to the thing we very much not want to do. We do it again.
So let's say you are making like a commitment maybe to level up in your fitness or your life in a certain area. Would that be like the same thing where it gets hard? There's a lot of pressure now to wake up at 5 a.m. every day, and then you might revert back to your second nature?
That's a good question. I don't know that I would process personally, and I'm not the scientist, so I couldn't tell you. but you know when it's too much. That said, for everybody in here, there's a level of stress that's too much. The other thing is your capacity grows. So my capacity now, 43, with everything we're doing now in life, is so much bigger. So it doesn't push me back because my capacity has grown. But when you're really pushing that capacity and you begin to feel like you're failing, right? You start to think failure thoughts, and it feels like it's too much, right? When life starts to feel like it's too much, sometimes that's business deals, sometimes that's commitments, whatever it is. But you know what I'm talking about. Everybody knows right now what I'm talking about because everybody's gauge is different. Everybody's thermometer and throttle is different, right? So you guys know what that is. And then that's when you'll find yourself the output, right? The input is too much pressure. The output is the old version of me. Does that make sense? That's how you gauge where you're at. Input's too much pressure, and then dang, this is stuff I used to do. I find myself responding the way I used to. I find myself getting short. Maybe you're in a relationship now and you have a spouse or a girlfriend or somebody that maybe it's a relationship with your parents if you're young. Then if you're young, like my man here, like my son, I can tell when the pressure's on because his attitude goes up, right? Well, the attitude that I've worked on and helped him to grow past that he can discern in the moment. You guys know what I'm talking about. Like you get into an argument with somebody that you're in relationship with, whoever that person is in your head right now, and you are level-minded and life is cool. It's been a good day. You're like, hey, I'm sorry. I'm not sure what's going on. You have a bad day. It's one of those worst days and somebody snaps at you. You're like, you know what? How about we do talk about this? Because I'm tired of you eating my Doritos. You know what I'm saying? Like, and all of a sudden you're firing back. Why is that? Just because your tank is full? No, you guys, we're way more complex than tank is full. Tank is full is the smallest way you could try to understand how all of these billions of neurons or trillions of neurons in our head fire. That's not why. It's because under great pressure, you stop thinking creatively and you start to respond out of second-hand nature. And you know what I'm talking about because for some of you guys, when you respond that way, you can see it like third person. You're like, oh, did I really just do that? I guess we're going to be talking about that for the next 3 weeks. You know what I mean? Like, you understand what I'm saying? Say something stupid to your parents, and then what happens is you double down. We double down, right? Because now we don't know why we did it, but now we want to defend who we are, right? Like, well, you push all the time, and we just push it and push it. We got to get to the mainframe, guys. Vincent, will you mind rolling that door up just a little bit further? I'm going to pretend like I'm cool, but I'm not. Uh, Thank you, sir. So what I want to talk to you guys about first and foremost is the willingness for you guys to address. Now, you guys are in a tight group here. I don't have 3 hours tonight. I'm not going to be able to tear this apart with you guys outside of you guys. Hopefully, my communicating about this mainframe piece and about the center of the universe has been enough for you guys to recognize, shoot, some of the reasons that I do feel like I'm self-sabotaging and can't figure that out is because I'm not willing to address where those things were that came in and offended my psyche, right? Whether that was a friend, a mom, a co-member, a co-family member, whatever it is. And listen, I'm going to get hella honest with y'all, man, because I've been helping young people for a very long time. One time I sat around a room full of kids, full of young dudes, just like you guys yourself, and we went around the table. Who here has not had, and I'm not asking you guys, I'm telling you what happened there, so I don't need hands up. Who here has not had an experience when you were a young person, a sexual encounter that left you scarred, marred, and it was either you hurting somebody else or somebody hurting you at a young age? Everybody's hand went up. I tell my wife now, I'd like to meet the room of people it actually didn't happen. Now, I do know it's possible. I'm certain that many people out there's still a handful of people that parents have done very well. We did very well, right? And still could not avoid all trouble. That's the thing. I still have to constantly fight, couldn't avoid all trouble, right? And then most of those things end up in secret, right? So even with us, I had a hard rule. My kids don't spend the night anywhere. Why? Because I sat at a table with everybody who said it was my uncle, it was my cousin, it was my brother, it was me to my brother, whatever it was. I sat at a table years ago and found out like the consensus is the person who didn't happen to is the actual one who is the unique one. So the reason I bring this up is a second ago, you may have been thinking about the person close to you that kind of hurt your feelings. I'm talking about that deepish. I'm talking about the stuff we bury because we don't want to talk to anybody about it. And I'm telling you that the very first step is that God, the creator of the heavens and the earth, Yahweh, Jesus comes, dies for our sins, pays the price. Something terrible happens to us, right? And it's not the end of the world. But the enemy, what he does is he puts you on a leash, like the elephant story, right? Where they take this elephant and they put him on a chain when he's young. And later on, you only have to put him on a small rope because they got him forever. Because in his head, he's got the chain on his ankle. That's what the devil does to you. And likely, if you have a terrible story, whether it was molestation, sexual abuse, violent abuse, maybe it's non sexual, whatever that story is, it feels like yesterday because the enemy reminds you 3 times a week, maybe 3 times a day. Hey, don't think you're doing any better. Remember, we got secrets. And how am I supposed to get any better in life if the enemy keeps poking at me every day saying I suck, reminding me that someday he may call in that secret. Someday he may send an email. Someday he might tell my new friends that I had an encounter, a sexual encounter. And maybe that sexual encounter was a same-sex encounter. And I've already put myself out there to be so manly. And if people found out that when I was in 4th grade, that something terrible happened to me, that feels like it was all my decision because that's the story that's written in my head now. How am I supposed to be who I want to be if people found out who I really am? We got to get down to the framework. The very first person you have to get honest with is you. The very first person you have to get honest with is you because I had many of those stories too, and I had to pack them all down so people didn't know who I was because I just didn't feel like those that loved me could handle these stories because there are a lot of them, a lot of terrible stories of bad things I did we got, the FBI was looking for us, you guys. Sexual problems, violence problems, guns, burglaries. We derailed a train. I literally was going to jail forever, right? That was all before 17. And then I had to try to live the rest of my life after I decided those were bad ideas. A normal person, it just didn't work. I just couldn't pull it off. I was a fake. I was a fraud for so long, dude. Why? Because I didn't want to be that person ever. But then as I could start to become somebody, as I could start to become whoever I felt like God had created me to be, I had to start unpacking those things at some point. Otherwise, I would always be a fraud and I would always be self-sabotaging. And you know why? Because anytime somebody gets close to that closet, you will freak out. Anytime somebody gets close to you and it feels like it's getting close, and somebody goes to reach their hands for that closet, you will snap like a dragon because you just don't want to be found out because every one of us at the core wants to be loved. Every one of us, one of our deepest desires is to matter. And then when we start getting close to people, it means a lot to us. It really does mean a lot to us. And disappointing people, if you have that thing, like you really don't want to disappoint people, it's because people care deeply about you. We've got to address the mainframe. How do we address the mainframe? First thing, I'm going to give you a couple to-dos, right? Your first thing to address the mainframe is you got to get honest. We've got to start looking in and go, where are those areas that it really hurt? Where are those areas that I find wounds and that I've been protecting? And then the things that you've been not willing to address yourself, the very first step is I got to get honest with myself about those things, right? If something happened to you when you were young, or if you did something to somebody when you were young, or if something happened a few years ago, not when you were young, the good news is that God is a redeemer and he can wash those things away, right? These things can be cleansed and you will have a second chance, no different than me. No different than most of us sitting in here right now. God will heal those places and bring healing. And if the enemy has been telling you these things were your fault and something happened to you, I need you to start getting honest and defending the narrative in your head. One of the things you have to do is contend against the narrative that's been built in your own head because we grow up and we have to start making sense of the world we lived in. So we start writing narratives that make it make sense. Those narratives were written by children. You guys understand what I'm saying? You wrote that narrative when you were young. And because you refuse to go backwards, you haven't had a chance to readdress the narrative. Do you understand what I'm saying? So now the kid wrote your story, of which you wouldn't even hand a knife to, right? Like you wouldn't trust that kid with your stuff. You're like, no, I would never give the younger version of me anything. Like I kind of just want to give that kid a hug, and tell him it's going to be okay. You understand what I'm saying? I say that because I was 33 years old, looking in the mirror at a UFC gym. And I asked myself, what would you say to the younger version of you? And I knew I had matured at that point because I said, I would just give him a hug. I'd just tell him it's going to be okay. Take it easy. Slow down, Dave. Right. I knew I was no longer connected to that young version. But for you guys, get honest. Let's address it. Right. Let's look back and then let's start to challenge the narrative of maybe something that maybe Maybe that happened to you when you were young and it was your mom or your dad or somebody, so whoever hurt you, you can go back and say, one, maybe it's, and I don't say maybe, one, you got to go back and forgive. Whatever wounds happened back there, you've got to go back and forgive those things. We got to clear that up. We cannot carry the anger and the frustration towards the individuals that hurt us and be able to ever be set free, right? For some of you guys that have spent time in church and for some of you guys that haven't, there's a narrative that I love that they use. They say that bitterness is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die from it. That's what you do, is you just drink in the poison and it only affects you. Bitterness rots up the bones. And sometimes by going back and addressing it now as an adult with a new version of where you guys are at, and process this, if you have somebody that you feel like I can process with in this group, process it. Right? This is stuff, guys, that will change your life. Don't fix your finances, or fix your finances, get rich. End up like Steve Jobs in Alone, dude. Right? Where his kid says, I didn't even know him. Right? If you don't fix this mainframe stuff, it doesn't matter what you do, you will not live a whole and holistic, beautiful life. In order for you to be the greatest version of yourself, you're going to have to start letting yourself go from and freeing yourself from some of the things that happened when you were younger, or freeing yourself from the people that hurt you. Does that make sense, guys? So we're gonna process it first, rewrite the narrative, right? And then the next step will be to start talking about it. And you'll be surprised that once the secret is out, once you've dealt with it, you've confronted it again, and once the secret is out and you're able to talk about it, you guys will be surprised how fast healing comes. When you start breaking the grip the secrets have on your life, you're going to start to get out of the hold and the cycle of toxicity that your programming is allowing to play. Because when you go back and you rewrite the narrative, right? We call this assigning a new purpose. Reframing it is what they'll talk to you about in leadership or in psychology. We talk about reframing the situation, right? Reframing the situation says, one day I was walking home when I was a kid and I got attacked by a dog. And now I'm terrified of dogs and I can't see dogs anywhere. And when I see people, I'm like, your dogs give me anxiety because when I was young, then I got attacked by a dog. So I don't even want to go outside anymore. And people get caught up in this narrative they built from the kid. Remember, the kid built the story. And then we live on it because it's the building block. It's the programming. This is where we're going to start. Remember, we're always terrified of dogs. When I get older, I don't even remember why I'm afraid of dogs. I just get around and my heart starts beating because the programming says, freak out, dog. But then when we go back and we reprogram purpose into this narrative, I go, man, I was out there alone and I've never addressed the fact that where the hell were my parents? Like, I was in the street by myself, right? This wasn't my fault. I wasn't a bad kid running down the street, and because of my actions, I was attacked by a dog. I was just a kid, and somebody was supposed to look out for me, and they didn't. And the whole time I've been telling myself that I'm terrified of dogs, and it was my fault. And I was like, no, I should have never been in the streets. Because that's what we do. Just so you know, every kid thinks he's 30. So every kid's brain that rewires you tells you, like, I made that mistake. I knew exactly what I was doing. I thought so too, until my kid was like 8 years old, the year that I'm, at age I pick up pornography in the field. And I'm like, this fool can't tie his shoes. I got to talk to him about wiping his butt before he walks out of the bathroom. And I'm holding me accountable for that age? You know what I'm saying? Like, you know what I mean? Like, I could tell this kid to put underwear on. And that's the age I start making mistakes. And I'm holding myself accountable. I was like, oh man, I got this way wrong. The enemy runs that narrative and I let the kid give me the programming. And you know why? Because it had to be my fault. Whatever it was, it had to be my fault. I had to be the broken one. We reassign it. We give purpose. We get honest about these situations that have traumatized. And we're like, where were my parents? Maybe it wasn't my parents' fault, but maybe it's not my fault. How about that? I'm not the guilty one. It's not my fault that I fell in that pool and almost died. It's not my fault that something terrible happened to me. I'm not saying it's other people's fault, but I've got to stop putting the blame on this guy. Does that make sense, you guys? And now I take the thing that meant so much harm to me, and rather than it bringing terror, it brings purpose to my life, but I'll never bring purpose to something I hide. Does that make sense, guys? Okay. All right. I'm going to move past that because we're running low on time. Once we have this foundation, right? Let's say we do some of this work, guys. You'll see once you start this process, it's so much easier to go to the second topic. Just pick the first one. Pick the hardest, biggest giant. So if everybody in here wants to be a badass, and you're all in here because you want to shake life down, right? One thing that we always heard when we were young was pick the biggest dude on the playground and punch him right in the face, right? If you pick the biggest giant, hit him first, every other one falls easy. So whatever you're after, don't take the little guy. Don't be like, well, I mishandled my finances, and that's not my fault. And you know what I'm saying? Like, and that's caused me some turmoil. Nah, whatever is the deepest, ugliest thing, because remember, it starts with you. You don't process with anybody else yet. You will have to for freedom, but remember, the first part's getting honest with yourself. Start taking that giant on first. Everybody knows who it is. I don't have to tell anybody in here what that giant is. Everybody already got him. Everybody already saw him in their head. They're like, oh, that guy, huh? Okay. Hit the biggest guy first, and then the other ones fall easy, right? Also works in a fight, by the way, you guys. So once we get this guy right, and this guy starts feeling whole, you start to process this positive makeup, which is like, now we process positive, positive. I took on the biggest giant. The next things I'm telling people about are easy. You know what I mean? So like, if I can tell you about the worst thing, the other things I'm talking about now, it's like nothing can get worse than this, right? Now, here we go. This is your inner circle, right? In relationship, your inner circle right here are those people, like I talked about it, that are extremely close to you. Those are if you're married, that's your wife and kids. If you're young, it's your parents. It's those people that are in your tight circle, that they're in your space where your everywhere space is. There's very little space they're not invited to. Your outside circle right here, dude, are those that are your really close friends, but they're not the ones you let sleep over, if you know what I'm saying, right? Like, you'd let them spend the night if they were in town, kind of thing. They could come by the house, but they're not your immediate family, which is, these are the people you would die for right here. And these people would be pissed off if you chose to die for. You know what I'm saying? Like, this would be the family that really loves you. That's like, why did you take that bullet? You know what I mean? And then these people over here in the third space, dude, are those that are in your community. Those are people maybe you're trying to do life with. You're trying to figure out who they are. They're people you like. They're people you get along with. They're people that you enjoy. This is your third wheel out here, your third. And this is everybody else you see at the grocery store, right? They're just people you're being kind to or people you're being mean to. It's just people you don't know. These are people you've chose to let into your levels of your life. This is something I've always lived by. Anybody that knows me knows that those boundaries, they might be invisible, but they're hella visible, right? Like, you can see them when you hit that wall, that there are levels in which I hold those boundaries, right? And I protect those. People talk about boundaries. You guys talk about boundaries inside of relationship, that we have to have boundaries. Boundaries protect relationship. They also protect the relationships you're engaged with. Part of that reason, you guys, is that relationships take effort, period, right? I'm going to talk to you guys